The coffee pot shattered on the linoleum floor at precisely 6:47 in the morning, and Grace Holloway knew it was going to be one of those days. The brown liquid bloomed across the yellowed tiles, a stain on her already exhausting life. In the living room, her youngest, Emma, started to cry over the sound of her preschool cartoons. "It's okay, sweetie," Grace called out, her voice tight as she grabbed the mop from the closet. "Mama just dropped something. I just dropped something." It was what she always said. Just dropped Tommy off late for soccer practice. Just dropped the rent check in the mail slot 2 days late. Just dropped another piece of her dignity every time she had to ask her boss for an advance on her paycheck. Grace was 34, though on most days she felt twice that age. Her dark hair, once worn long and loose, was now pulled into a perpetual, practical, forgettable ponytail. The lines around her eyes had deepened in the 2 years since Marcus had died, carved there by grief and exhaustion in equal measure. She worked double shifts at Rosie's diner on the edge of town, slinging breakfast for truckers and lunch for the courthouse crowd, smiling until her face ached, pretending she wasn't drowning. 4 children. 4 beautiful, hungry, growing children who needed shoes, school supplies, birthday cakes, and hope. Tommy was 12, old enough to see through her brave facade. Lily was 10, sensitive and anxious. Jake was 7, wild and fearless. And Emma, sweet Emma, was only 5, still young enough to believe everything would be okay because Mommy said so. Marcus had been a good man, a great man, really. He worked construction, came home covered in grime and fatigue, but always had a smile for his kids, always had enough energy left for a game of catch or help with homework. Then came the accident, a scaffold that wasn't secured, a fall that could have been prevented, a funeral that left Grace with 4 children, a mortgage she couldn't afford, and a hollow space in her chest that wouldn't heal. The insurance money had run out 6 months ago. Grace finished mopping up the coffee, checked the clock, 6:53, and began herding the children toward the door. Backpacks, lunchboxes, permission slips. The morning routine was a military operation, and she was a general running on empty. "Mom, I need $5 for the field trip," Lily said, as she climbed into their old Honda Civic, the one with the check engine light that had been on for 3 months. "When's the trip, honey?" "Friday." That gave Grace 4 days to conjure $5 she didn't have. "I'll get it for you, sweetie. I promise." She dropped the kids at school, waved with a smile she didn't feel, and drove to the diner. The morning shift bled into the afternoon. Fried eggs, pancakes with extra syrup, coffee refills, smiles and nods, smiles and nods. Her feet ached. Her back ached. Everything ached. "Grace, you got a letter," Rosie called from behind the counter around 2 o'clock. Rosie was in her 60s, had owned the diner for 30 years, and possessed a heart bigger than her ample frame. "Came yesterday, but you rushed out before I could give it to you. Looks official." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind that meant business. The return address was for Morrison and Associates, attorneys at law, from a place called Millbrook, 3 hours north in the mountains. Her first thought was panic. Had she forgotten to pay something? Was someone suing her? Could you even sue someone who had nothing? "You all right, hun?" Rosie asked, noticing her pallor. Grace shoved the envelope into her apron pocket. "Just need a minute." She ducked into the small back office, which smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, though Rosie had quit 5 years ago. With trembling hands, she tore open the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Dear Ms. Holloway, it began. We regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Mr. Howard Marsh, who passed away on October 19th of this year. As his only known living relative, you have been named the sole beneficiary of his estate. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of the property, specifically the Marigold Hotel, located at 247 Mountain View Road, Millbrook. Grace read the letter 3 times. Howard Marsh. The name stirred a faint memory. Her grandmother had mentioned him once or twice, years ago, her mother's uncle, estranged from the family for reasons no one ever fully explained. He'd moved away before Grace was born, and as far as she knew, no one had heard from him in decades. And now he was dead and had left her a hotel. She walked back into the diner, letter in hand. Rosie took one look at her face and poured her a cup of coffee without being asked. More bad news? I don't know. Grace sank onto a stool, her legs suddenly shaky. My great-uncle died. Someone I never even met. And he left me a hotel. A hotel? Rosie's eyebrows shot up. A whole hotel? Apparently. By the end of her shift, the news had spread through the diner like wildfire. Grace became the center of attention, something she never wanted. The regulars all had opinions, and they weren't shy about sharing them. Hotels are money pits, said Old Man Patterson, who'd eaten the same lunch at the same table for 20 years. My cousin bought a motel once, went bankrupt in 2 years. You should sell it right away, added Mrs. Chen, who worked in real estate down the street. Before you get stuck with property taxes and maintenance. What's the place called again? Asked Derek, one of the truckers. He pulled out his phone. The Marigold. Let me look it up. His face fell as he scrolled. Oh, Grace, honey. You might want to see this. He turned the phone around. The screen showed an old photo of what might have once been a grand building. 3 stories of Victorian architecture with a wraparound porch and ornate trim. But the photo was dated. The comments below it told a different story. Been abandoned for years. Millbrook's basically a ghost town since the mill closed. My dad says that place is cursed. Ought to be torn down. Not even worth the land it's sitting on. Grace felt the tiny spark of hope she hadn't realized she was holding flare and die in her chest. Of course. Of course it was worthless. Of course the one thing that had ever fallen into her lap was just another burden, another weight to carry. You should probably just sign the property over to the bank or something, Derek said, not unkindly. Cut your losses. Grace drove home in a daze, the letter burning a hole in her purse. She picked up the kids, made dinner out of what was in the pantry, mac and cheese again, for the 3rd time that week, and went through the motions of homework, baths, and bedtime. Finally, at 10:30, she sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. The math didn't add up. It never did. Even with her second job cleaning offices on weekends, she was $300 short every month. The car needed repairs. Tommy needed new shoes. The landlord had started making noises about raising the rent. She picked up the letter again and stared at it. A hotel. A worthless hotel in a dead town. But it was also a way out. Maybe. Possibly. Even if it was a wreck, even if it was falling apart, it was hers. A place to live where she wouldn't have to worry about rent. Maybe she could fix it up, sell it, make just enough to start over somewhere with a lower cost of living. This is crazy, she whispered to herself. But what did she have to lose? The next morning, Grace called the law office. A secretary with a brisk voice told her that yes, Mr. Morrison could see her. How about next Tuesday? Grace explained she couldn't possibly get time off work on such short notice. Could they do a phone consultation? There was a long pause, and then Mr. Morrison himself got on the line. Ms. Holloway, he said, his voice gravelly with age. I understand your difficult situation. However, your great-uncle left specific instructions. The property must be claimed in person within 30 days of notification, or it will be sold at auction, with the proceeds reverting to the county. 30 days? Grace's heart sank further. But I can't just... I have children. I have a job. I understand. But these were his wishes. Mr. Morrison's voice softened slightly. If it's any consolation, Ms. Holloway, your great-uncle was a peculiar man, but he wasn't a fool. He must have had his reasons for leaving this to you. That weekend, Grace did something she hadn't done in a long time. She asked for help. She called her neighbor, Patricia, a retired school teacher who sometimes watched the kids in a pinch. She called her boss and pleaded for 3 days off. She checked her bank account, $217.32, and calculated they had just enough for gas to make the trip. We're going on an adventure, she told the children on Monday morning. What kind of adventure? Tommy asked, suspicious. At 12, he had learned to be wary of sudden changes. We're going to see a hotel in the mountains. It belonged to my great-uncle, and now it's ours. Are we moving there? Lily asked in a small voice. Grace took a deep breath. I don't know yet, sweetie. We're just going to take a look, see what we've got. The drive north took longer than expected. The highway gave way to winding mountain roads, and the trees cactuses closed in around them, blazing with autumn colors. Reds, golds, and oranges that seemed almost artificial in their vibrancy. The GPS signal flickered and died about 2 hours in, forcing Grace to rely on increasingly vague road signs. Millbrook appeared suddenly around a bend, and Grace's heart sank. The town looked like a place time had forgotten. Main Street was 3 blocks long, lined with buildings that had clearly seen better days. Half the storefronts were empty, their windows dusty or boarded over. The few businesses that remained, a general store, a post office, a diner even more run down than Rosie's, had an air of defeat about them. This place is creepy, Jake announced from the back seat. It's just quiet, Grace said, though she felt the same unease. There were people around, a few cars parked on the street, an old man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the general store. But the town felt hollowed out, like a photograph of itself. The GPS came back to life just long enough to direct them up a narrow road that climbed the mountainside. The trees grew thicker here, and the sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the road turned to gravel, then to little more than a dirt track. And then she saw it. The Marigold Hotel rose from the landscape like a monument to decay. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, just like in the photo, but reality was so much worse. The paint was peeling off in long strips, revealing weathered gray wood beneath. Several windows on the upper floors were broken, dark gaps that looked like missing teeth. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on one side, and ivy had consumed much of the eastern wall, climbing all the way to the roof. Oh my God, Grace whispered. She pulled the car to a stop in what might have once been a circular driveway, now overgrown with weeds. For a long moment, no one moved. The kids were silent, just staring at the building. "Whoa," Tommy finally said. "We can't live here," Lily choked out. Grace's voice was barely audible. "I know, sweetie." She had been a fool, a desperate, foolish woman who had let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen. But this wasn't good. This was a disaster. It was another bill, another problem, another piece of proof that Grace Holloway could not catch a break. "I want to go home," Emma whimpered. "We will," Grace said, fighting back tears. "We just need to. I need to look inside for legal reasons. Then we'll go." She got out of the car, her legs stiff from the drive. The October wind cut through her thin jacket, carrying the smell of rot and old wood. Dead leaves skittered across the porch as she approached the front steps, testing each one carefully before putting her full weight on it. The front door was enormous, made of dark wood, with an oval window of stained glass, or what was left of it. Now it was just fragments held together by spider webs and time. Grace tried the handle. Locked, of course. She started to circle the side of the building, with the children trailing behind her like a line of uncertain ducklings. Broken furniture was piled against one wall, chairs missing legs, a dresser with its drawers spilled out on the floor, more shattered window panes. A rusted fire escape clung to the building, looking as if a strong gust of wind would send it crashing down. And then, near what must have been the kitchen entrance, she saw it. A small door, barely a meter high, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Perhaps a service entrance, or access to a cellar. It was ajar. "Stay behind me," Grace told the children. She nudged the door open and peered inside. Darkness and the thick scent of mildew greeted them. Grace pulled out her phone, its flashlight cutting a sharp beam through the gloom. The narrow passage opened into what was clearly a cellar, an old storeroom lined with wooden shelves. Jars, caked in decades of dust, sat in silent rows. Grace moved forward cautiously, the children close at her heels. At the far end, she found a set of stairs leading up. The door at the top was unlocked. They stepped into what must have been the hotel's main kitchen, a vast space with an antique gas range, a prep island the size of Grace's entire kitchen back home, and a walk-in pantry. Everything was coated in dust and debris, but the bones of the place were incredible, professional grade, the kind of kitchen that could serve 100 guests. Beyond the kitchen lay a dining hall. A crystal chandelier, half its prisms missing, hung over tables still set with china, as if the guests had simply vanished mid-meal. Then came the atrium, dominated by a grand staircase wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast, curving gracefully up to the second floor. "Whoa," Jake breathed. Despite the decay, the grime, the sheer catastrophe of it all, Grace felt a stir in her chest. Beneath the ruin, she could see what it once had been. Grand, beautiful, the kind of place people would travel to, a place to celebrate and make memories. "Mom, look." Lily was pointing to a wall covered in framed photographs. Grace moved closer, illuminating them with her phone. Black and white images of the hotel in its glory days. The veranda crowded with occupied rocking chairs. The dining hall bustling with people in their Sunday best. A jazz band in the atrium. A wedding on the front lawn. In several of the photos, a tall, thin man with a slight, knowing smile stood proudly. Her great-uncle, she realized. Howard Marsh. He looked happy in those pictures. Proud. "What's that?" Tommy asked. He was standing by the reception desk, pointing at something behind it. Grace walked over and saw what he'd noticed. A small, metal safe, partially hidden behind an old guest ledger. She reached for the handle, surprised to find it wasn't locked. Inside was a single brass key, old but well kept. Attached was a tag with neat, looping handwriting. "Suite 7," Grace read aloud. She looked up at the grand staircase. They ascended cautiously, testing each step. The second floor was a long corridor lined with doors, all closed. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3. At the very end of the hall, set apart from the others, was a door marked with an ornate brass 7. The key slid into the lock, perfectly. Suite 7 was different. It was still dusty, clearly abandoned, but it was also intact. A sitting room with furniture draped in white dust cloths, a small kitchenette. Beyond that, a bedroom with a massive four-poster bed and another door leading to a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. "This is amazing," Lily said, pulling a sheet off a chair to reveal deep burgundy velvet beneath. Grace walked through the suite in a daze. On the sitting room desk, she found a leather-bound ledger and an envelope with her name on it. With trembling hands, she opened it. "My dear Grace, and if you are reading this, then you came. A part of me thought you wouldn't. Thought you were too practical, too sensible. I'm glad I was wrong. You don't know me, and for that I am sorry. Family politics kept us apart. Old grudges I never had the energy to mend. But I've kept up with you over the years. I know about Marcus. I know about your children. I know you're struggling. The Marigold is yours now. Most would say it's worthless, and by conventional measures they'd be right. But conventional measures don't account for everything. This hotel has been in our family for 3 generations. It's made of more than just rooms and wood and nails. Look at the ledger. Not at the columns, but at the stories. People will tell you to look at the bottom line, at what's owed. But the real value is in what we built here. Perhaps it's time for the Marigold to mean something again. The deed is yours, of course. You can walk away, sell it for the land, and take what little you can get. No one would blame you. But if you stay, if you're brave enough, stubborn enough, crazy enough to try, then everything you need is already here, including the answer to why I left it to you. Suite 7 is yours. It always has been, since the day you were born. I've kept it ready, just waiting. Welcome home, Grace. Your great-uncle, Howard Marsh." Grace read the letter twice, then a third time, her hands shaking. The children were exploring the suite, their voices echoing softly. She picked up the ledger and opened it. The first few pages were standard hotel accounting. Dates, room numbers, charges. But halfway through, the entries changed. Different handwriting, a different purpose entirely. Sarah Patterson, room 12. Stayed 3 nights during her divorce. Left feeling strong enough to start over. The Morrison family, suite 4. Anniversary trip. Remembered why they fell in love. James Chen, room 8. Finished his novel here. Said the quiet helped him find his voice. Wedding of Sarah and David, front lawn, 200 guests. Said it was magic. Entry after entry, stretching back decades. Not financial records, but something else. Stories, memories, lives touched. And at the very end, in her great-uncle's script, a single line. This is what the Marigold was built for. Not for profit, but for purpose. Not for success, but for shelter. Not for glory, but for grace. Grace, her name, his word for what this place meant. She walked to the window and looked out. From up here, she could see past the overgrown grounds to the valley beyond. Mountains rolled in every direction, spectacular and wild. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold. Behind her, Emma laughed at something Jake said. Tommy was examining an old radio on the desk, and Lily was stroking the velvet chair with a small smile. Grace thought of her cramped apartment, her aching feet, the piling bills, and the suffocating feeling of slowly drowning. She thought of Marcus, who would never see his children grow up. She thought of old Mr. Patterson, Sarah, Mr. Chen, and Derek the truck driver, all so certain this place was worthless. Maybe they were right. They were probably right. But standing here in Suite 7, holding a letter from a man she'd never met, who somehow knew exactly what she needed, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Foolish, reckless, utterly insane hope. "Kids," she said, turning from the window, "how would you feel about staying here for a little while?" 4 pairs of wide eyes stared back at her. "For real?" Tommy asked. "To live here? Maybe. Possibly. I don't know yet. But this suite is ours. It's clean enough. We can stay the night at least. Get a feel for the place before we make any decisions." "It's like a castle," Emma said, her voice full of awe. "It's like a haunted castle," Jake corrected, but he was grinning. Grace looked down at the ledger in her hands, at the letter, at the key that had been waiting for her. She thought of what her great-uncle had written. "Everything you need is already here." She had no idea what that meant, no idea how she could possibly make this work. But for the first time since Marcus died, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward she hadn't seen before. "We'll stay the night," she said again, more firmly this time. "And tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." As darkness fell over the Marigold Hotel, Grace gathered her children in Suite 7. They ate granola bars from her purse and drank water from the bottles in the car. They made up the 4-poster bed with linens Grace found in a closet. Old but clean, smelling faintly of lavender. As her children drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the travel and the strangeness of it all, Grace sat by the window, watching the hotel's silhouette against the starry sky. Somewhere in the building, she heard a sound. It was like the wind whistling through the empty halls, or maybe like music, playing from very far away. The faint, phantom-like melody of a piano. Grace should have been scared. She should have bundled the children up, run back to the car, and driven straight home to their tiny apartment, to the familiar problems and the safe, suffocating existence. Instead, she pulled the ledger close and began to read. Story after story, life after life, all the invisible ways this place had mattered. And somewhere in those pages, in her great-uncle's careful hand, she found what she had been looking for without knowing she was lost. A reason to stay. A reason to fight. A reason to believe that the inheritance no one wanted might be exactly what she needed. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the dusty windows of Suite 7, and for a disorienting moment, had no idea where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The drive, the hotel, the letter, the impossible decision to spend the night. She sat up and looked around. The children were still asleep, sprawled across the enormous bed like a pile of puppies. Tommy had an arm thrown over Jake's head. Lily was curled up at the foot of the bed, and Emma was tucked against Grace's side, thumb in her mouth, a habit she was supposed to have given up a year ago. Grace's back ached from the old mattress, and her mouth tasted like stale cotton. But through the window, she could see morning mist rising from the valley, the mountains like something from a painting, layered in shades of purple and blue that stretched to the horizon. She slipped out of bed, trying not to wake anyone, and went to the bathroom. The sink was stained, and the faucet groaned in protest. But when she turned the handle, water sputtered out, rust-colored at first, then clearing. She splashed her face and looked at her reflection in the grimy mirror. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Her reflection didn't answer. By the time the children were awake, Grace had a plan. They would stay for 3 days, just 3 days, to properly assess the situation. She would take an inventory of what was salvageable, figure out if the estate had any other assets, and make an informed decision about whether to try and fix it or simply sell it as is and take what she could get. 3 days. That was reasonable. That wasn't crazy. "All right, team," she announced once everyone was up and dressed. "We are going to explore this place properly. But there are rules. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Nobody touches anything that looks dangerous. And if you see anything broken or sharp, you tell me immediately. Got it?" "Got it," they chorused. They started on the second floor, moving systematically from room to room. Most were in a similar condition, dusty and filled with antique furniture, but structurally sound. The bathrooms were ancient but functional. The bed frames were decent. The dressers, once cleaned, could be used. But it was the things they found within the rooms that made Grace's skin prickle with a mixture of unease and curiosity. In room 3, Lily discovered a painting of a woman in a blue dress, her eyes staring directly at the viewer, seeming to follow them around the room. A small brass plaque on the frame read, "Constance, 1879. "She's pretty," Lily said, "but sad." In room 6, Tommy found a hat box filled with letters, all addressed to the Marigold Hotel, but seemingly never delivered. Grace skimmed a few, love letters mostly, from soldiers during World War II. "My dearest Margaret, when I close my eyes, I can still see the veranda at the Marigold, and your smile." "Why weren't these ever sent?" Tommy asked. Grace had no answer. Room 9 held a collection of old photographs in ornate frames. Groups of people posed stiffly in Victorian-era clothing, miners with soot-stained faces, women in elaborate hats. None were identified, just strangers, frozen in time, watching from the walls. In room 12, Jake found something that made him call out for his mother. Grace rushed in to find him pointing at the wardrobe, where someone had carved words directly into the wooden back panel. "They're still here. They never left." 1973. A cold dread trickled down Grace's spine. "What does that mean?" Jake asked, his earlier bravado gone. "I don't know, sweetie. I don't know. It's probably just the house settling," Grace murmured. "A prank, maybe." But the words sounded hollow, unconvincing even to her own ears. The third floor was in worse shape. Several rooms bore the scars of water damage from a leaky roof, the floorboards soft and treacherous in places. But in what must have been the honeymoon suite, a corner room with windows on 2 walls and a balcony overlooking the valley, they found something that brought Grace to a dead stop. An old, enormous safe, sunk deep into the wall, and it had been welded shut. Grace ran her fingers over the metal seams, sealed with crude, hurried-looking welds. The safe's door had a combination lock, But it didn't matter. The welds meant it couldn't be opened without a cutting torch. Why would someone weld it shut? Tommy asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Maybe there's treasure inside, Emma said, bouncing with excitement. Or maybe it's empty, and they wanted to make sure it stayed that way, Grace said. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from it. What could possibly be inside that someone would want to seal away forever? By midday, they were all exhausted and grimy. Grace had taken a mental inventory. 32 guest rooms, 8 bathrooms, a cavernous kitchen, the dining hall, the grand lobby, and Suite 7. She'd seen the staircases leading to the 4th floor, which she hadn't dared explore yet, and the basement, which she'd only glimpsed when they arrived the day before. They needed supplies, food, cleaning materials, maybe a few basic tools. That meant a trip into town. Grace bundled the children back into the car and navigated the winding road down to Millbrook. In the daylight, the town looked even more depressed than it had the night before. The few people on the street watched their car pass with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. The general store was called the Millbrook Mercantile, and a bell tinkled above the door as they entered. The interior was dark and cluttered, a jumble of everything from canned goods to hardware and fishing tackle. An older woman stood behind the counter, thin and sharp-featured, watching them with narrowed eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she'd rather not. "We're just picking up some supplies," Grace said, forcing a smile. "We're staying up at the Marigold." The woman's expression soured further. "Heard someone inherited that place. Was wondering when you'd show up." "I'm Grace. These are my children." The woman didn't offer her name, just watched as Grace and the kids moved through the store, gathering bread, peanut butter, cleaning supplies, and a box of industrial-strength trash bags. At the register, Grace hesitated, then asked, "Do you know anything about the hotel? Its history?" The woman's hands stilled as she rang up the items. "Your uncle nearly drove himself into the ground trying to keep it open. Place should have been torn down decades ago." "Why do you say that?" The woman's laugh was brittle. "Ask around town. They'll tell you. The Marigold's been cursed since the fire of '73. 10 people died. They say you can still hear the screaming on quiet nights." Grace felt her children press closer to her. "That can't be true. A fire that big, we would have found evidence." "Oh, you'll find it," the woman said, shoving the items roughly into paper bags. "Check the West Wing. That's where it started. Your uncle rebuilt parts of it, but you can still see the scars." She tapped the total on the register. $57.43. Grace paid with a credit card she really couldn't afford to use and herded the children back to the car. As they drove away, she saw the woman in the window, watching them go, and the look on her face wasn't just hostile. It was fear. Back at the hotel, Grace set about making sandwiches while the kids explored the dining hall, their voices echoing in the vast space. She was spreading peanut butter on bread, trying not to think about fires and curses and welded safes, when she heard footsteps on the front porch. She froze. They were alone out here, miles from town, and she hadn't seen another car on the road. She gripped the peanut butter knife she was holding, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing, and crept to the window. An elderly man stood on the porch, so old he seemed frail. He must have been in his 80s, or even 90s. He was wiry, dressed in faded work clothes and a canvas jacket, and he was staring up at the hotel's facade with an expression of profound sadness. Grace set the knife down and went to the front door, opening it carefully. "Can I help you?" The old man turned to look at her, and his eyes widened slightly. You must be Grace. You have your grandmother's eyes. Grace stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost shut behind her. I'm sorry. Do I know you? The name's Eli Thornton. I worked for your great-uncle for 40 years. Did the maintenance mostly. Kept the place from falling down around his ears until he didn't need me anymore. Happened about 3 years ago. Said he couldn't afford to pay me. I told him I'd work for free, but he was too proud for that. The old man's voice was gentle, despite his words. I've been keeping an eye on the place from a distance. Saw the lights on last night. Figured someone had finally come. Grace studied him. He had kind eyes, a face weathered by time, and hands that looked like they had worked hard their entire life. Would you like to come in? I was just making lunch. I wouldn't say no to a cup of coffee if you have it. They didn't have coffee. It was on the list. But Grace made tea with some bags she'd found in the kitchenette of Suite 7. Eli sat at one of the dining tables while the children's laughter drifted in from the lobby. So you've inherited the Marigold, he said, cupping the warm mug in both hands. Howard told me he was leaving it to you. I told him you'd sell it, that a young woman with kids wouldn't want to be tied to a money pit like this. But he said you'd come. Said you'd understand. Understand what? He took a long sip of tea. That this place is important. That it's worth saving. He looked around the dining hall, at the dusty chandelier and the peeling wallpaper. The woman at the store probably told you about the fire. She said 10 people died in 1973. 6 people, he corrected softly. 6 is still too many, but folks around here like to exaggerate. The fire started in the West Wing late at night. Some folks got out. Some didn't. Howard rebuilt what he could, but the hotel was never the same after that. The town turned on him, said he'd been negligent, that the wiring was old, that he'd put profit before safety. Was he negligent? No. Eli's voice was firm. Howard was a lot of things, but he wasn't careless. That building was his life. He knew every inch of it. The fire was ruled an accident. Faulty wiring in a guest room. But Howard, he never believed that. What did he believe? Eli was silent for a long moment. He believed someone set it, on purpose, to cover up for something else, something that went missing that very same night. Grace felt her pulse quicken. What went missing? He never told me the details, but whatever it was, it had been in the hotel since it was built. Something valuable, not just money, something that meant a great deal to the history of this town. He set his mug down. He spent the last 20 years of his life trying to figure out what happened. It's why he couldn't keep the hotel running properly. He was obsessed. Did he ever find out? If he did, he didn't tell me. He stood up, his joints creaking. But I'll tell you something he did say once. This hotel was built on secrets. Gold rush money, they say. But no one ever said where that gold came from, or who really owned it. The Marigold was the crown jewel of this town, back when Millbrook was something. And when it burned, a part of the town died with it. He walked toward the door, then paused. Don't sell it, Grace. Not until you hear the whole story. Howard left you this place for a reason. Whatever he was looking for, maybe it's your destiny to find it. After he left, Grace stood in the lobby for a long time. The whole story. What story, and how was she supposed to find it? The answer came that afternoon, when she went down to the basement to see if there was a functional boiler. The basement was a vast, sprawling labyrinth of crawl spaces and service tunnels. dimly lit by small, high windows at ground level. Using her phone's flashlight, Grace picked her way past shrouded furniture and stacked boxes until she found what must have been Howard's old office. A desk sat buried under a mountain of papers, maps, blueprints, and journals, dozens of them, filled with her great-uncle's spidery handwriting. Grace picked one up, dated 1974, the year after the fire, and opened it. March 3rd. Interviewed Mary Patterson again today. She insists she saw someone in the West Wing on the night of the fire, someone who wasn't a guest. But her description makes no sense. Says he wore old-fashioned clothes, like something from the 19th century. The police think the trauma has confused her memories. Grace flipped a few pages. July 15th. Found another reference in the town archives. The Marigold was built in 1878 by an August Brennan, a mining magnate. Official story is he made his fortune in silver, but I found a letter that suggests otherwise. He discovered something in the mountains, something that predated the mining operations, something the native tribes had hidden. Further in, an entry from October 9th. The sealed chamber. It's there, on the original blueprints, but it doesn't appear anywhere on the reconstruction plans after the 1896 earthquake. A sub-basement, below the basement. But where is the entrance? The fire destroyed any records that might explain. Grace's hands were trembling as she put the journal down and sifted through the papers on the desk. There. A blueprint, yellowed with age, showing the hotel's foundation, and marked in faded ink. Sealed chamber access via lobby foundation. She grabbed the blueprint and several journals and ran back upstairs. That night, after feeding the children more peanut butter sandwiches and putting them to bed early in Suite 7, Grace went down to the lobby, armed with her phone, a flashlight, and the blueprint. The plan showed the entrance to the sealed chamber somewhere near the grand staircase. But Grace couldn't see anything obvious. She ran her hands over the walls, knocking, listening for hollow spots. Nothing. She was about to give up when a low rumble of thunder echoed outside. Grace looked up, startled. The sky had been clear all day, but now she could hear the first drops of rain begin to tap against the windows. The storm came on fast, the way mountain storms do. One moment, distant thunder. The next, a downpour. Then, a bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby, close enough that the resulting crack of thunder shook the entire building. Grace stumbled back from the wall and heard something else. A groaning, tearing sound, deep and protracted, as if the building itself were shifting. She turned and watched in horror as a section of the wall near the reception desk began to bulge outward. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle warp, but then the plaster cracked. It spiderwebbed and fell away in chunks, revealing wooden beams beneath. And then, with a sound like a great sigh, the wall caved inward, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Grace stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs as rain lashed the windows. Another flash of lightning lit up the hole in the wall. No, not a hole. It was a doorway. A passage that had been sealed, hidden behind plaster and wallpaper, and forgotten by time. She should wait until morning. She should call Eli, or someone, anyone, who knew what they were doing. She definitely should not walk into a mysterious passage in the middle of a thunderstorm in a supposedly cursed hotel. But Grace thought of the bills stacked on her kitchen table back home. She thought of her children, sleeping upstairs in a building she couldn't afford to keep, but also couldn't afford to sell. She thought of her great-uncle, spending 20 years searching for answers. She thought of his journals, and the idea that the Marigold had been built not for profit, but for a purpose. Not for gain, but for grace. Before I tell you what happened next, let me just say this. What Grace found in that passageway that night changed everything. It turned her understanding of the hotel, her family, and the town of Millbrook completely on its head. It revealed a truth that no one, not the townspeople, not Eli, not even her great-uncle Howard, could have ever expected. And this is where the story you think you're hearing takes a turn that will reshape it all. If you're enjoying this story and you want to see how it ends, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Believe me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Now, back to Grace and that passageway. She took a deep breath, checked that her phone was fully charged, and stepped through the opening into the dark. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, with stone walls that felt far older than the hotel itself. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like tarnished coins. Grace's footsteps echoed as she moved forward, the light from her phone dancing across the walls. The passage sloped downward, and Grace realized she was descending beneath the basement, into some sublevel that had no right to exist. The blueprints had shown it, but seeing it was different. This wasn't part of the hotel's original construction. It was something older, something that had been here long before. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, the passage opened into a chamber. Grace stopped in the entrance, her breath catching in her throat. The chamber was circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with close-fitting stone walls that seemed carved from the mountain itself. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon the pedestal, nothing. Whatever had been there was long gone. But around the walls, Grace could see markings. They weren't exactly words, but symbols. Some looked to be of Native American origin, geometric patterns she'd seen in museums. Others were different, more elaborate, almost like a map or a diagram. And on the floor, in the dust that coated everything, Grace saw footprints. Recent ones. Someone had been here and not long ago. She moved toward the pedestal, her mind racing. This was what her great-uncle had been looking for. This hidden chamber beneath the hotel, built to protect something. But the fire of 73, someone had used the chaos to come down here, to take whatever had been guarded for over a century. Grace photographed everything with her phone, the symbols on the walls, the empty pedestal, the footprints in the dust. Then she noticed something else, a loose stone near the floor. She knelt and reached inside, her fingers closing around something small and cold. It was an old brass key, smaller than the one for Suite 7, and attached to it, a tag with a single word etched into the metal: truth. A clap of thunder boomed overhead, so loud it felt as if the mountain itself was splitting open. Grace pocketed the key and scrambled back through the passage. When she emerged into the lobby, rain was lashing through the broken windows, and the wind howled through the building like a living thing. She ran up the stairs to Suite 7, checking on the children, who were still fast asleep. Thank God. Then she sat at the damp desk, staring at the key in her palm. Truth. What truth? And what did this key open? She opened her great-uncle's journal again, flipping through it more carefully this time, searching for any mention of a key. And there, near the end, she found it. If you are reading this, if you've found the chamber and it is empty, and I believe it will be, because I believe it was cleared out on the night of the fire. Then you must find the key. I never could. I searched every inch of this hotel, but it wasn't here. Or maybe I just couldn't see it. Maybe I was looking for the wrong thing. The key opens the safe in the honeymoon suite. The welded safe. I sealed it myself the day after the fire, after I realized what had happened. I couldn't bear to look at what was inside. I couldn't bear the proof of what I had failed to protect. But someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what was lost. I hope whoever finds this has the courage I lacked. Grace stared at the words, her wet hair dripping onto the page. The welded safe on the third floor, the key in her hand. Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in the building, the sound of the piano echoed again. Or maybe it was just the wind, whistling through the empty rooms. It was impossible to tell. Grace glanced at the door to the bedroom where her children slept, oblivious that their mother had just discovered a secret chamber and a key that supposedly opened a welded safe, and that she was possibly losing her mind. She should sleep. She should wait until morning, when everything might make more sense. But Grace knew she wouldn't sleep. Couldn't. Not now. Not when she was this close to understanding why her great-uncle had left her this impossible, beautiful, broken place. She picked up the key, felt its weight in her palm, the weight of truth, whatever that meant, and made a decision. Tomorrow, when the storm had passed and her children were awake, she would open that safe. She would find out what had been hidden for 50 years, what someone had killed for, what her great-uncle had spent his life trying to understand. Then, and only then, would she decide if the Marigold Hotel was worth saving, or if it was, as everyone said, just another burden no one wanted. But sitting there in the dark, with the rain lashing the windows, her great-uncle's journals spread around her, and a mysterious key in her hand, Grace felt something she hadn't expected. Excitement. For the first time in 2 years, since Marcus had died and left her drowning, Grace felt like she was part of something bigger than her own survival. As if maybe she'd been brought here for a reason that had nothing to do with inheritance or money or practical decisions. Maybe she'd been brought here to finish what her great-uncle had started, to find what was lost, to uncover the truth someone had been willing to kill to keep hidden. The storm continued to howl, and Grace O'Malley, waitress, widow, mother of 4, sat in a haunted hotel and planned her next move. Because whatever she was, whatever this place was, one thing had become crystal clear. The story of the Marigold Hotel was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat at the desk in Suite 7, the brass key in her hand, reading her great-uncle's journals by lamplight as the storm battered the windows. The children slept soundly in the next room, but Grace's mind was racing too fast for rest. By the time a gray, damp dawn broke through the dissipating clouds, she had read through 5 journals and pieced together a timeline that sent a shiver down her spine. 1878. August. Brennan builds the Marigold Hotel with money he claims came from silver mining. 1896. A major earthquake damages the hotel. During repairs, a subchamber is sealed off and removed from all official records. 1923. August Brennan dies. The hotel passes to his daughter Margaret, who is married to Howard Marsh's father. 1957. Howard Marsh inherits the hotel. Business is booming. Millbrook is thriving. 1973. The fire. 6 people die. Something is stolen from the sealed chamber. Howard begins his investigation, and then, year after year of dead ends and frustrated notes. Howard suspected the fire wasn't an accident, but he could never prove it. He suspected someone in the family was involved. Distant relatives who felt cheated out of their inheritance when the hotel passed to him, instead of being divided among Brennan's descendants. But he never found proof, never found the key to the welded safe, never understood the full picture. Now Grace had that key, and her hands couldn't stop shaking. Tommy emerged from the bedroom around 7, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. At 12, he was tall for his age, with his father's lanky frame and dark, serious eyes that made him seem older than he was. "Mom, did you get any sleep?" "Not really." Grace put down the journal she was reading. "Tommy, I need your help with something. Something important." He became instantly alert, the way he always did when she needed him. Since Marcus died, Tommy tried so hard to be the man of the house, and it broke Grace's heart even as she relied on it. "What is it?" She showed him the key, explained about the passage, the chamber, her great-uncle's journal entry about the welded safe. Tommy listened, his eyes wide. "You went down there? Alone? In the middle of the storm?" I know, it was stupid. But Tommy, I think there's something in that safe that explains everything. Why this hotel is important. Why Uncle Howard left it to me. And I need someone with me when I open it. Someone I trust completely." Tommy's chest puffed out slightly. "The welded safe on the 3rd floor. We'll need tools, something to cut through the welds." Grace thought for a moment. "Jed. He said he did maintenance here for 40 years. He might have the equipment." Leaving the other children sleeping, Grace scribbled a note in case they woke up, and she and Tommy headed into town as the sun rose, burning away the storm clouds. Jed lived in a small house on the outskirts of Millbrook and answered the door in faded blue pajamas, looking surprised. "Grace? Is everything all right?" "I found something last night," she said, her words tumbling out. "A passage that opened up during the storm. A chamber under the basement." She held up the key. Jed's eyes widened. "He found it. Howard found the key." "No, I found it. In the chamber, hidden in the wall. He wrote that it opens the welded safe in the honeymoon suite, and I need cutting equipment to get through." "That safe?" Jed shook his head. "I helped Howard seal that thing, the day after the fire. He was in a state I'd never seen. Didn't tell me what was inside. Just that it needed to stay shut until someone who understood came along." "I think I'm supposed to understand," Grace said. "Please, Jed. Will you help me?" He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Let me get dressed. I've got a plasma cutter in the shed. If we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it right." An hour later, they were standing in the honeymoon suite on the 3rd floor. The other kids were awake now, eating cereal in Suite 7 under strict instructions not to leave the room. Tommy stood beside Grace, trying to look brave. Jed had set up the plasma cutter and was examining the welds. "These are solid," he said. Howard knew what he was doing. "This won't be quick." "It's okay," Grace said. "I've waited this long." The plasma cutter roared to life, bright and hot, and Jed began to methodically slice through the welds. Sparks showered across the floor. The smell of hot metal filled the room. Grace's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. After what felt like hours, but was more likely 20 minutes, he made the final cut and stepped back. "That's it. The welds are gone. If that key fits, you should be able to open it. Grace approached the safe, Tommy right behind her. Her hands trembled as she inserted the brass key. It didn't go into the combination lock, but into a secondary keyhole she hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath where the welds had been. The key turned with a click that sounded impossibly loud. Grace grabbed the handle and pulled. The safe door swung open with a groaning protest, its hinges, unmoved for 50 years, finally giving way. Inside sat a leather satchel, bulging with contents, and a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Grace lifted out the satchel first and set it on the floor, then the box. Her fingers shook as she unbuckled the satchel and peered inside. Documents. Dozens of them. Legal papers, certificates, deeds. She pulled out the top one and began to read, her eyes moving faster and faster across the page. "Mom?" Tommy's voice seemed to come from far away. "What is it?" Grace couldn't speak. She was reading a trust document dated 1876, 2 years before the hotel was built. The Brennan Family Trust, established by August Brennan, for the purpose of protecting assets from seizure and ensuring the prosperity of future generations. She pulled out another document, a deed, showing that the Marigold Hotel wasn't just a hotel. It was the flagship property of a portfolio that included mining rights, timber rights, water rights, and properties across 3 states. Another document, a list of assets dated 1972, the year before the fire. The total value made Grace's vision blur. $200 million. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "This can't be right." But there was more. She pulled out a letter, handwritten, addressed to whoever might find it. The script was her great-uncle's, but shaky, as if written in great distress. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened. The fire has occurred, and someone has broken into the chamber. They have taken the original trust documents, the ones that prove an unbroken chain of ownership from August Brennan, through my line, to me. What they do not know is that I kept copies hidden in the one place they would never think to look, sealed in the very safe everyone assumed held the hotel's cash and insurance papers. The person who set the fire was family. I am sure of it. One of the cousins who felt cheated when the trust was passed to me instead of being divided. They meant to steal the trust documents and rewrite the chain of ownership, cutting me out and taking control of the assets. But they failed. The documents they stole from the chamber were decoys, copies I had placed there years ago when I first suspected a family member was plotting something. The real documents are here. The Brennan Family Trust is worth far more than anyone imagines. The assets have been carefully managed, conservatively invested, and shielded from public record. The hotel was never meant to be a moneymaker. It was meant to be a stewardship, a guardianship, a place where the controlling trustee would live and watch over everything. But I am old and tired, and I have been fighting off vultures for decades. The town turned on me after the fire. My own family tried to rob me blind. I have held this secret alone for too long, and so I am leaving it to Grace. Not because she is my blood, though she is, but because she is the only one who ever saw me as a person instead of a bank account. Grace wrote to me once when she was 8 years old, a crayon letter with flowers drawn in the corners. She had heard from her grandmother that I lived all alone and wanted me to know that someone was thinking of me. She asked if I was lonely. She told me about her favorite foods and her hopes for the future. She signed it, "Your friend, Grace." I have kept that letter for 26 years. It is in the wooden box. She won't remember writing it. She was so young. But I remember. And when I learned she had lost her husband, that she was struggling with 4 children and no direction, I knew. I knew she was the one who would understand that wealth means nothing without compassion, that assets are just numbers unless they are used to build something of meaning. Grace, if you are reading this, the trust is yours. All of it. The documents herein will prove it beyond any legal doubt. But be warned, the family will come. They have been circling for decades, waiting for me to die so they can pick the bones. They do not know about these copies. They believe they destroyed the only proof. You will have to fight, but I believe you can win. I believe you are strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to finish what I could not. Restore the Marigold. Restore Millbrook. Use the trust the way August Brennan intended, to build, not to extract, to create, not to consume, and know that you were never alone. I was always watching, always caring, always waiting for you to come home. Your great-uncle, Howard. Grace's vision blurred with tears. She couldn't breathe. Tommy was saying something, leaning forward to read over her shoulder, but all Grace could hear was the ringing in her own ears. At 8 years old, she had written him a letter. She had a vague, hazy memory of it. Her grandmother mentioning someone named Howard, who lived alone in the mountains. Grace had felt sorry for him and wanted to send him something cheerful. She had forgotten all about it by the following week. But he remembered. For 26 years, he remembered. Tommy's hand on her arm brought her back. Grace, what does this mean? Grace wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. It means... Her voice cracked. It means we're not broke anymore. It means the hotel isn't worthless. It means my great-uncle left us a fortune, and I have to figure out what to do with it. She reached for the wooden box and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, just as Howard had said, was a letter written in crayon on time-yellowed cardstock. The flowers in the corners were lopsided and enthusiastic. The handwriting was large and unsteady, with reversed letters and creative spelling. Dear Uncle Howard, Grandma says you live all alone in the mountains. Are you lonely? My name is Grace. I am 8. I have a dog named Pickles. My favorite food is mac and cheese. When I grow up, I want to help people. I hope you are happy. I am thinking of you. Your friend, Grace. At the bottom, she had drawn a smiley face and a stick figure she'd labeled you, next to a stick figure labeled me. Grace clutched the letter to her chest and sobbed. All the pain of the last 2 years, all the fear and exhaustion and desperation, came flooding out. Tommy wrapped his arms around her, and the other children quietly left the room to give them privacy. When Grace finally composed herself, she placed the letter carefully back in the box and returned to the file folder. There were more documents, statements showing the trust's current value, account numbers, contact information for the law firm that had managed the assets all these years. Everything she would need to claim her inheritance. $227 million. The number was incomprehensible, more than Grace had ever dreamed of. Enough to fix the hotel 100 times over. Enough to secure her children's futures. To never again worry about rent or doctor's bills, or whether she could afford winter coats for them. Enough to change everything. But it wasn't the money that made her hands tremble as she gathered the papers. It was the weight of the responsibility. The knowledge that her great-uncle had spent his entire life protecting this trust. Fighting off relatives who saw only dollar signs, trying to honor a promise made by August Brennan over a century ago. And now it was hers. They spent the rest of the morning in the bridal suite, poring over every document. Tommy helped translate some of the legalese, taking notes on his phone. Grace made lists, trying to organize her racing thoughts into something coherent. The Brennan family trust controlled the Marigold Hotel and its 30 surrounding acres, mineral rights to 3 depleted silver mines now held for historical reasons, timber rights to 2,000 acres of old-growth forest, water rights to the Crystal River and its tributaries, rental properties in 6 different towns, a diversified investment portfolio managed by a firm in Boston, and something Grace didn't fully understand about water control on a railway line that had been converted into a scenic railroad. The total current value, according to the most recent statement, was $227,600,000. Grace had to sit down when she read the final number. "We need to tell someone," Tommy said. "No." The word came out sharper than Grace intended. "Not yet, Tommy. Think about it. The second we make this public, what do you think will happen?" He nodded slowly. "The vultures will come." Exactly. Just like Howard said. Every distant cousin, every lawyer sniffing for a fee, every investor wanting to help us manage our windfall. "I need time to think," Grace said. "Time to understand what I'm supposed to do with this. What Uncle Howard wanted me to do." But time, as it turned out, was something she didn't have. They headed back to Suite 7 for lunch and found a car in the driveway. A sleek black Mercedes that looked entirely out of place against the hotel's decaying facade. And standing on the porch, looking irritated and impatient, was a man in an expensive suit. "Can I help you?" Grace asked as she approached. The man turned and his face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Grace Holloway? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. I'm Richard Brennan, your cousin." He paused. "Well, third cousin, technically. We share a great-great-grandfather in August Brennan." Grace's blood ran cold. She glanced at Tommy, who had gone very still. "I didn't know I had a cousin named Richard," she said carefully. "We're a sprawling bunch. The Brennan family is quite extensive," Richard said, extending a hand. "I heard you inherited this place. Such a burden for you to take on, especially with children to look after. I wanted to reach out immediately, to let you know you're not alone. Family ought to stick together." Grace didn't take his hand. "That's very kind, but we're managing just fine." "Are you?" Richard looked past her at the hotel, his expression calculating. "This building is a disaster. The cost to repair it would be astronomical. The property taxes alone must be crippling. And I understand you're a waitress. Forgive me if this sounds condescending, but this is a problem that requires significant capital." "What are you proposing, Mr. Brennan?" "Richard, please. I'm proposing a solution. Several of the family members have been discussing the Marigold situation. We'd like to buy your share. Take this weight off your shoulders. We're prepared to offer $200,000 for the property, far more than it's worth in its current state. You could start fresh somewhere else, give your children a stable life. You wouldn't have to worry about this rotting ruin anymore." $200,000. 2 days ago, that would have sounded like a fortune. Now, knowing what she knew, it was an insult. They were trying to rob her, just as they had tried to rob Howard. "It's a generous offer," Grace said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll need to think about it." Richard's smile tightened. "Of course. But don't take too long. The property deteriorates by the day, and so does its value. Plus, there's the matter of the estate taxes. You're aware you'll have to pay an inheritance tax, aren't you? Probably more than you can afford. And they don't wait for you to make repairs." It was a thinly veiled threat. Take our offer or drown in debt." "I'll keep that in mind," Grace said. "Now if you'll excuse me, my children need their lunch." She walked past him, ushering Tommy and the younger kids toward the door. Richard called after her. "I'll be staying at the Millbrook Inn for a few days, should you want to discuss this further. But Grace, don't wait too long, this offer won't be on the table forever." Inside, Grace locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. "He's one of them," Tommy said quietly. "One of the ones Howard warned about." "He knows," Grace whispered. "Somehow, he knows there's more to this place than it seems." Over the next 3 days, more of them came. First was Margaret Brennan Clark, an elegant woman in her 60s who claimed to be August Brennan's great-granddaughter through a different line. She brought a homemade pie and a sympathetic smile and suggested Grace consider dividing the property among all the descendants. "August would have wanted the family to share," she said sweetly. Next came a lawyer named Stuart Finch, representing something called the Brennan Family Alliance. He brought papers for Grace to sign, documents that would place the hotel in a family trust controlled by a board naturally, composed of cousins Grace had never met. Then came the investors, 3 different groups in 2 days, all coincidentally interested in buying the distressed asset of the Marigold. They offered varying amounts, none higher than $500,000. They all said the same thing. The hotel was worthless, the repairs impossible. They were doing her a favor by taking it off her hands. Grace said no to all of them. And with every refusal, the smiles grew more rigid, the warnings more direct. "You're making a mistake," Stuart Finch told her, his voice cold. "Fighting the family will cost you everything. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you." "There's no way you can maintain this place," Margaret said, her sweetness curdling into something hard. "You're being selfish, hoarding it from the family." "You're in over your head," Richard Brennan sneered on his final visit, his patience gone. "You're a single mother with no business experience and no capital. You're going to lose it all, and your children will suffer for your stubbornness." But Grace had spent 2 years watching her life fall apart. 2 years of being told she couldn't manage, couldn't cope, couldn't survive. She had learned to smile through the doubt and keep fighting anyway. And she had learned something else, something she'd forgotten, until she read her great-uncle's letter. She wanted to help people. That 8-year-old girl with the crayon letter had dreamed of making a difference. Maybe it wasn't too late. On the 4th night after opening the safe, Grace gathered her children in Suite 7. She had spent the day reading more of Howard's journals, studying the trust documents, thinking about August Brennan's original purpose. She had made a decision. "I need to tell you all something," she said, perched on the edge of the bed, where her 4 children watched her with worried eyes. "This hotel, it's not what everyone thinks it is. It's not worthless. It's part of something much bigger, something that could change our lives." She explained it in terms they could understand, about the trust, the money, the relatives who wanted to take it away, and the choice she had to make. "We could sell," she said, "take whatever money we can get and go back home. Buy a house, live comfortably, never worry about bills again. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But," she trailed off. "But Uncle Howard left it to you for a reason," Tommy finished for her. "Because he thought you could do something with it. Something important." Grace looked around Suite 7, imagining it clean and restored, imagining the entire hotel brought back to life. He wanted the Marigold to mean something again, for it to be a place where people could come to find shelter, find a purpose, find grace. Like your name, Lily said softly. Just like my name, Grace agreed. I think I want to try. I think I want to restore this place. Use the money from the trust, the way it was meant to be used. To make the hotel beautiful again. To bring life back to this town. That would be a lot of work, Tommy said, but his eyes were shining. It would be a huge amount of work, Grace admitted. Years of it. And we would have to fight. Fight the relatives who want to take it from us. Fight the people who say it's impossible. But if we did it, Emma piped up, we could help people, like you wanted to when you were little. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. Yes, sweetie, we could help people. I want to stay, Jack said immediately. This place is cool, like a castle. I want to stay too, Lily added. Can we make our rooms pretty? If we stay, Grace promised, a real smile spreading across her face for the first time in days. You can each pick your own room and decorate it however you want. Tommy fell silent, a somber expression settling on his face. Grace knew what he was thinking. Dad would have loved this place. He would have called it a project worth doing. Grace held her breath. Marcus would have loved it. He would have rolled up his sleeves and dived right in, seeing the potential beneath the layers of decay. He would have told her they could do anything, as long as they did it together. But Marcus was gone, and Grace couldn't do this with him. She would have to do it anyway. So, Emma asked, her small voice cutting through the silence, are we staying? Grace looked at her 4 children, at their hopeful faces and shining eyes. She thought of the trust documents tucked away in the secretary desk of Suite 7, of the letter from an 8-year-old girl who just wanted to help people. She thought of a great uncle who had fought for decades, alone, to protect something he believed in. She thought of Richard Brennan's threats, of Margaret's false sympathy, of all the vultures circling, just waiting for her to fail. And she smiled. Yes, she said, her voice clear and firm. We're staying. We're going to restore the Marigold Hotel. We're going to make it beautiful again. And we're going to show every single person who said we couldn't that they were wrong. The children cheered, piling on top of her in a tangle of arms and legs. And for the first time since Marcus died, Grace felt something like certainty take root in her chest. This would be hard, probably the hardest thing she had ever done. The relatives would fight her. The town might resist. She would have to learn about trusts and property management, about construction, and 1,000 other things she knew nothing about. But she would also be honoring a promise made by August Brennan more than a century ago. She would be finishing what Howard Marsh had started. She would be showing her children that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take the unexpected path, the difficult path, the one everyone tells you is impossible. And maybe, just maybe, she would become the person that 8-year-old girl had wanted to be. Someone who helped people. Someone who built things up instead of watching them crumble. Someone who understood that the greatest inheritance wasn't money or property, but purpose. Outside Suite 7, the Marigold Hotel creaked and groaned in the wind. Somewhere, the phantom piano played its melancholy tune. The building was wounded, yes, but it was not dead. It was waiting. Waiting to be restored. Waiting to matter again. Waiting for Grace Holloway to prove that some things, some places, were worth fighting for. And Grace, in the middle of her children's celebration, gazing at the hotel key in her palm, and the trust documents on the desk, and the whole impossible future stretching out before her, finally understood what her great-uncle had always known. The inheritance no one wanted was exactly the one she needed. Not the money, though that would help. Not the property, though it was impressive. But the purpose. The chance to build something that mattered. The opportunity to remake not just a building, but herself, her children, maybe even an entire town. That was the real legacy. That was what Howard Marsh had left her. And Grace Holloway, widow, waitress, and mother of 4, was going to claim it. The fight was about to begin. But for the first time in a very long time, Grace was ready. The morning after her decision, Grace woke before dawn and made her way down to the lobby. The storm-blasted hole in the wall still gaped open, revealing the passage to the chamber below. Rain had seeped in, leaving puddles on the floor. The entire place smelled of damp and decay. Grace stood in the center of the atrium, turning slowly, taking it all in. The cracked plaster, the shattered chandelier, the grand staircase with its loose boards and faded runner. The sheer enormity of what she had committed to hit her like a physical weight. $200 million had sounded like an infinite resource. Now, it felt like a pittance. The thought of what it would take to restore a 32-room hotel from the ground up was dizzying. Electrical, plumbing, foundations, roof repair, windows, flooring, furniture, kitchen equipment, landscaping. The list was endless. But Grace had worked double shifts for 2 years. She knew all about endless lists. You didn't look at the whole thing at once. That way lay madness. You looked at the next task, just the next one, and then the one after that. First task. Call the law firm in Boston that managed the trust. The conversation with Gerald Morrison, no relation, as he'd pointed out in his first letter, lasted 2 hours. He was skeptical at first, convinced Grace was some kind of con artist. But when she read him the numbers from the trust document and described the contents of the safe, his tone shifted entirely. Mrs. Holloway, I've managed this trust for 30 years. Your great-uncle was adamant about keeping everything confidential, about never contacting potential heirs directly. He said the right person would find the documents when the time was right. Gerald's voice grew thick with emotion. I never thought I'd see this day. Howard was a good man, a careful man. If he chose you, then you must be remarkable, Grace said, a stubborn edge to her voice. Gerald chuckled. Hardly. Now let's talk about what happens next. What happened next was a whirlwind of legal processes, document authentications, and financial transfers that left Grace's head spinning. But Gerald was patient, explaining everything in terms she could understand. Yes, there would be estate taxes, substantial ones, but the trust had provisions for that. Yes, the relatives would likely contest her claim, but the documentation was ironclad. And yes, she could access funds immediately for emergency repairs on the hotel. What do you want to do with it? Gerald asked. Sell the property? Lease it? Develop it? Grace thought of the tattered ledger upstairs, the one filled with stories instead of financials. She thought of her great-uncle's letter, of being 8 years old and wanting to help. I want to restore it, she said. The whole hotel. Make it what it was meant to be. She paused, an idea taking shape as she spoke. Not a commercial hotel. The market in Millbrook is too depressed for that. I want to make it a haven, a place where families who've lost everything, to fire, flood, disaster, can stay for free while they rebuild their lives. We'd have regular rooms, too, for tourists, to help fund the operations. But the core of it would be a sanctuary, a place people can find shelter when they need it most. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Holloway," Gerald said finally, his voice thick. "That is precisely what August Brennan intended when he created this trust. He wanted his wealth to serve people, not just accumulate. Howard tried, but the fire broke him. He couldn't see past his own grief. But you—" He cleared his throat. "I think you might actually pull this off." Within a week, Grace had hired a project manager, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who had spent 20 years restoring historic buildings and came highly recommended. Carmen drove up from Denver, took one look at the dilapidated hotel, and grinned. "This is going to be incredible," she said. "Look at these bones. They don't build them like this anymore." Carmen moved into one of the second-floor rooms that Grace and the kids had cleaned and made minimally habitable, and immediately began drawing up plans. They would work in phases, she explained. First, securing the building and making it weatherproof. Then, systematically restoring each section, leaving the elaborate finish work for last. "It will take 3 years," Carmen warned. "Maybe 4. And it's going to be loud and messy and chaotic." "We'll manage," Grace said. Predictably, the relatives went berserk. Richard Brennan filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence, saying Howard had been senile when he updated the will. Margaret Brennan Clark filed her own suit, claiming the trust should be divided among all living descendants. Stuart Finch filed on behalf of the Brennan Family Alliance, alleging the trust documents were fraudulent. Gerald Morrison flew out to meet Grace in person. He was in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "They're going to make your life a living hell," he said, blunt as a hammer. "These cases could drag on for years." "Let them," Grace said, gesturing to the documents from the safe. "We have the proof." Proof doesn't always matter when people have enough money for good lawyers. "Then I'll hire better lawyers," Grace said, meeting his gaze. "You're not going to give up, are you, Gerald? My great-uncle protected this his entire life. I'm not going to lose it now." A slow smile spread across Gerald's face. "Good. Because I've waited decades to see someone fight for what Howard believed in. The trust will pay for your legal defense. Will make them regret they ever came after you." And so began the longest year of Grace's life. The lawsuits crawled through the court system. Motions, depositions, hearings. Grace spent hours on video calls with lawyers, reviewing documents, giving testimony. The relatives took to driving by the hotel, sometimes with cameras, trying to catch her doing something they could use against her. But Grace kept working. Carmen's crew arrived in early December, a team of skilled tradesmen who had committed to the long haul. They started with the roof, then moved to the foundation, then the electrical and plumbing. The hotel filled with the sounds of hammers, saws, and drills. Dust coated everything. The children adapted with a surprising resilience. Grace pulled them from their old school and enrolled them in Millbrook Elementary, a tiny building with 3 teachers and 32 students in total. The local kids were curious about the newcomers, especially as word of the hotel restoration spread. Tommy, at 12, became Carmen's shadow, learning about construction and historic preservation. He had a knack for it, an eye for detail that earned him appreciative nods from the project manager. Lily, the artistic 10-year-old, began documenting the restoration. She took photos every day, kept a journal, and sketched out ideas for the room designs. Grace found her one night in what would become the library, surrounded by paint swatches. "I want every room to tell a story," Lily explained. "Like this one could be the mountain room, with colors like rock and trees and sky. And the one next door could be the river room, all blues and silvers. "I think that's beautiful, honey," Grace had said. 7-year-old Jake, fearless and friendly, appointed himself the crew's mascot. The workers adored him, teaching him the names of tools and letting him help with small tasks. He wore a miniature hard hat Carmen had given him and took his responsibilities very seriously. And Emma, the observant 5-year-old, seemed to understand more than anyone gave her credit for. She befriended Eli, who visited often to check on the progress. The two of them would wander the hotel together, chattering about which room would belong to whom, and how pretty it would all be when it was finished. But it wasn't just Grace's family working on the hotel. Something shifted in Millbrook that first winter. Maybe it was the sight of the construction crew, bringing business to Lucy's diner. Maybe it was curiosity about what Grace was doing. Maybe it was just the human tendency to be drawn toward a glimmer of hope. Whatever the reason, people started showing up. Eli was the first, of course. He came by every day with his tools, helping Carmen wherever she needed him. He knew the building's quirks, its hidden spaces, its history. He was invaluable. Then came Sarah Chen, whose family owned the real estate office. She was in her 40s, sharp and practical, and she showed up one Saturday morning with coffee and pastries. "Heard you'll be needing furniture," she said. "My grandmother used to own half the antique shops in this county. I can find you period-appropriate pieces for a fair price." Grace hired her on the spot as a procurement manager. Marcus Patterson, old Mr. Patterson's grandson, appeared next. He was a plumber in his 30s who'd been about to move to Denver for work. "But if you're hiring local," he said, "I'd rather stay. This is my home." Carmen hired him immediately. One by one, the residents of Millbrook began to emerge. Some came to offer their skills: carpentry, painting, landscaping. Others came with food for the workers, or supplies they could spare. Some just came to watch, to see the crown jewel of their town being brought back to life. Grace welcomed them all. By spring, the hotel had a community growing around it. The crews ate lunch in the now weatherproof and functional dining hall, and locals would stop by to join them. Conversations started. Connections formed. People who hadn't spoken in years found themselves working side by side. The town was waking up. In March, Grace got word that the first lawsuit had been dismissed. The judge had reviewed the trust documents and found them to be authentic and legally binding. Richard Brennan's claim of undue influence had no merit. 2 down, 1 to go. In May, the Brennan family alliance suit was dismissed on similar grounds. The trust was clear. It passed down a single line of succession, not to all descendants. Margaret Brennan Clark's lawsuit was still pending, but Gerald was confident it would meet the same fate. Grace should have been relieved. Instead, she just felt exhausted. The legal battles had taken so much energy, so much focus, and the restoration was barely a third of the way complete. "You need a break," Carmen said one evening, finding Grace in Suite 7, staring at budget spreadsheets. "You're going to burn out." "I can't afford to burn out." "You can't afford not to, Grace. You're doing something incredible here. But you're also raising 4 children, fighting a court battle, and trying to manage a multi-million-dollar restoration. Something has to give." Grace knew Carmen was right, but she didn't know how to slow down. Slowing down felt like stopping, and stopping felt like failing. The turning point came from an unexpected source. In June, a woman named Patricia Morales arrived at the hotel. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with an air of calm competence. "I'm a relief coordinator," she explained when Grace met with her. "I've worked with FEMA and various nonprofits, helping families displaced by fires, floods, hurricanes, She paused, her gaze direct. I heard about what you're doing here, creating a haven for families in crisis. That's the plan, Grace confirmed. Once we finish the renovations, probably another 2 years. Patricia smiled. What if I told you that you could start sooner? Not with the whole hotel, obviously, but a start. She laid out her proposal. The West Wing was nearly finished. 6 fully restored rooms with working bathrooms and heat. Grace could open that section now as a pilot program, partnering with relief organizations to begin serving families while the rest of the hotel was completed. It would give you experience running the refuge program, Patricia said. Allow you to work out the kinks before you're at full capacity. And honestly, the need is urgent. Every month, families fall through the cracks, needing more time than standard relief programs allow. You could be that lifeline. Grace felt something click into place. She had been so focused on finishing the entire project that she had lost sight of why she was doing it. People needed help now, not in 2 years. Let's do it, she said. The West Wing of the Marigold Hotel opened quietly that August, 1 year after Grace's arrival. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just 6 carefully restored and furnished rooms, waiting for the families who needed them. The first guests arrived 2 days later, the Morrison family from Colorado, who had lost their home in a wildfire. A mother, a father, and 3 young children. Everything they owned had been reduced to what could fit in their car. They were supposed to stay for 2 weeks while they sorted out insurance and housing. They ended up staying for 2 months. Grace watched them transform. The children, traumatized and withdrawn at first, slowly came back to life. They made friends with Grace's kids, playing on the hotel grounds, exploring the mountains. The parents, drowning in paperwork and grief, found the space to breathe, to process, to heal. This place saved us, Ezra Morrison said the day they left, his eyes bright with tears. Not just because we had a roof over our heads, but because someone cared. Because we weren't alone. More families came. A single mother with twins displaced by a flood. An elderly couple who lost their home in a gas explosion. A young family whose apartment building had burned down. Each stayed as long as they needed, never asked for payment, and were never treated like a charity case. Grace learned the complexities of running a refuge, how to balance structure with flexibility, how to offer support without being intrusive, how to create a space that felt both safe and healing. And something else happened, something Grace hadn't anticipated. The hotel began to heal her too. She had been so focused on surviving for so long, since Marcus had died, since before that, really, that she had forgotten what it felt like to build something, to create instead of just endure. Watching families arrive broken and leave whole. Watching her own children grow into confident, compassionate people. Watching a dead town come back to life around the Marigold. It filled something in Grace that had been empty for years. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. By the second summer, the hotel was 2/3 complete. The grand lobby gleamed with restored woodwork. The dining room could seat 80. The kitchen was professional and spotless. The upper floors still needed work, but the transformation was undeniable. Millbrook was changing too. 3 new businesses had opened on Main Street. A coffee shop, a bookstore, and an outdoor gear outfitter. The Millbrook Inn, once barely hanging on, was now booked solid with tourists who came to hike the mountains and stayed for the charm of a town being reborn. You did this, Eli said one evening, sitting with Grace on the restored veranda. You brought us back to life. We did this, Grace corrected him. All of us. That September, Margaret Brennan Clark's lawsuit was finally dismissed. Gerald called with the news, his voice jubilant. It's over, Grace. The trust is yours, uncontested. No more legal challenges. Grace hung up the phone and cried, not of relief, precisely, but from the sheer weight of holding on for so long, finally being lifted. That night, she gathered her children and told them they'd won. They cheered and hugged, and Jake asked if this meant they could get a dog. Maybe, Grace laughed. Probably. They did get a dog, a golden retriever puppy they named Copper, and life continued its forward momentum. The restoration progressed. More families passed through the refuge program. The town continued to grow, and Grace began to plan for the grand reopening. The Marigold Hotel would officially open all 32 of its rooms in June, 3 years after Grace's arrival. They would have the refuge wing, always free, always open. They would have rooms for tourists at reasonable rates, beautifully appointed. And they would have the original Suite 7, where Grace and her family still lived, now fully restored to its Victorian glory. Carmen suggested a gala for the reopening, a proper celebration with the whole town invited. Grace agreed, though the idea of being the center of attention made her nervous. You deserve this, Carmen insisted. Let people celebrate what you've built. The planning took months. Sarah Chen coordinated with local businesses to provide food and music. Eli worked with Jake, now 10 and surprisingly handy, to string lights across the grounds. Lily designed the invitations, beautiful hand-drawn cards featuring the hotel's facade. Tommy, now 15 and taller than his mother, Sarah, managed the guest list and RSVPs. And 8-year-old Emma appointed herself the official greeter. I will stand at the door and welcome everyone, she announced, and I will wear my fancy dress. As June approached, Grace found herself spending more and more time in her great-uncle's old office. She had kept it largely as it was, a museum of his life and work. His journals lined the shelves. His desk still held his reading glasses and pen set. In the top desk drawer, she found one last letter she hadn't yet read. It was sealed in an envelope marked, "For the grand reopening." Grace had saved it, waiting for the right moment. The night before the gala, she finally opened it. My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, then you have done what I could not. You have restored the Marigold, brought it back to life. I wish I could be there to see it, but I know my time is short, and I am at peace with that. I want to tell you a story I've never told anyone. When I was a young man about your age, I left Millbrook to seek my fortune. I wanted wealth, success, recognition. I wanted to prove I was more than just the caretaker of a family hotel in a small mountain town. I spent 20 years chasing that dream. I made money, lost it, and made it again. I had great successes and even greater failures. And through it all, I was miserable, because I had forgotten the most important lesson my mother ever taught me. Wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we touch, the kindness we show, the difference we make. I came back to Millbrook when I was 48, exhausted and empty. The Marigold was struggling. The town was dying. It all felt hopeless. But I stayed, because I didn't know where else to go. And slowly, I learned what my great-grandfather, August Brennan, knew when he built this place, that the true purpose of wealth is to create space for compassion, that money is just a tool, and what matters is how you use it. The Marigold became my teacher. Every guest who stayed here, every story I recorded in that ledger, every life that intersected with this place taught me that success isn't about what you accumulate, but about what you give away. I'm sorry I let the fire break me. I'm sorry I couldn't keep it going. I'm sorry I spent 20 years hoarding the trust instead of using it the way it was meant to be used. But I am not sorry I waited for you. You were always meant to inherit this grace. Not because of blood, but because of character. Because you wrote a letter to a lonely old man when you were 8 years old. Because you understand, instinctively, that people are more important than property. The Marigold is yours now. The trust is yours. The future is yours. Use it well. Use it to heal, to shelter, to give. Use it to become the person that little girl with the crayon letter dreamed of being. And know that I am proud of you. Proud of your courage, your stubborn refusal to give up, your beautiful, reckless hope. You are everything I should have been. Welcome home, Grace. Welcome to the life you were always meant to live. With all my love, Uncle Howard. Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her dress. She would share it tomorrow at the gala. It deserved to be heard. The morning of the grand reopening dawned clear and perfect. The June sunlight spilling across the valley, the mountains etched against a brilliant blue sky. Grace woke early and walked through the hotel alone, taking it all in. The lobby, with its restored crystal chandelier catching the light and casting rainbows on the walls. The grand staircase, its banister polished to a high gleam, the runner a rich crimson. The dining room, tables already set with white linens and wildflower centerpieces. The library, filled with books donated by townspeople, with comfortable chairs arranged around a stone fireplace. The sunroom, all windows and plants and light. And upstairs, 32 guest rooms, each one unique, each one beautiful, each one ready. 3 years ago, this place had been a ruin, a shell that everyone said should be torn down. Now, it was a masterpiece. Grace stepped outside onto the grounds. The lawns were manicured, the flower beds overflowing with roses and lavender. The wraparound porch, entirely rebuilt and safe, now held rocking chairs and small tables. String lights were draped between the posts, ready to glow when evening fell. And there, at the entrance to the circular drive, was a new sign. The Marigold Hotel. Established 1878. Restored 2026. She touched the sign gently, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. Behind her, she heard footsteps and turned to see her children approaching, all dressed in their finest. "Ready, Mom?" Tommy asked. "Ready," Grace said, her heart full. The guests began to arrive at noon. The residents of Millbrook came first. Eli in a suit Grace had never seen him wear. Sarah Chen with her husband and children. The elementary school teachers. The owners of the new businesses on Main Street. They came in their Sunday best, carrying covered dishes, bottles of wine, and bouquets of flowers. Then came the people from further away. Carmen and her crew, Patricia Morales from the relief organization. Several of the families who had stayed in the refuge program had driven for hours to be there. Gerald Morrison drove up from Boston. And yes, even a few relatives came, though Richard Brennan and Margaret Brennan Clark were conspicuously absent. A few distant cousins showed up, curious about the woman who had bested them all. and Grace greeted them with the same warmth she showed everyone else. By mid-afternoon, the hotel and its grounds were teeming with people. Music drifted from a local band playing folk songs and jazz standards. Food covered every surface in the dining room. Children ran, laughing, through the gardens. Adults toured the hotel, marveling at its restoration. Grace moved through the crowd in a grateful daze, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, trying to believe that this was real, that she had actually done it. As evening approached and the sun began to dip behind the mountains, Carmen tapped a glass to get everyone's attention. The crowd gathered on the lawn in front of the veranda, where a small podium had been set up. "Most of you know me," Carmen began, her voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "I've had the privilege of working on this restoration for 3 years. I've overseen a lot of projects in my career, but nothing like this one. The Marigold Hotel isn't just a building. It's a testament to what's possible when one person refuses to give up, when someone chooses compassion over profit, community over convenience, and hope over despair." She turned to Grace, who was standing at the edge of the porch. "Grace, come up here." Grace ascended the steps on trembling legs. The crowd's applause was a distant roar, as if she were underwater. She gripped the podium to steady herself. Public speaking wasn't her forte, a fact that drew a ripple of nervous laughter from the audience. "3 years ago," she began, "I was a waitress with 4 children and no future. I was drowning. And then, a letter arrived about an inheritance nobody wanted." She told the story, edited for time but hitting all the key moments. The derelict hotel, the hidden documents, the decision to restore it, and the long fight to protect it. "My great-uncle Howard left a letter," Grace said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "I'd like to read a part of it for you now." A hush fell over the crowd. Grace unfolded the letter and read the final paragraphs, her voice catching on the words about wealth measured in lives touched, about the marvel's purpose being to create a space for compassion. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. "Uncle Howard wrote that true wealth is compassion," Grace said, folding the letter again. "I didn't understand that 3 years ago, but I do now. This hotel isn't mine, it's ours. It belongs to everyone who helped to—" She stopped, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as a powerful wave of pressure seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. Marcus glanced at the clock. 1 minute past 10. "Let's start timing these." He worked methodically, transforming a corner of the cabin into a delivery room. Clean sheets on the bed, medical instruments sterilizing in boiling water, improvised stirrups fashioned from clean rope and cushions. Every movement was efficient, with no wasted energy, no hint of panic. Sarah watched him through waves of growing discomfort. "You've really done this before?" she asked. "Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan." He positioned lanterns to provide the best light. "They weren't ideal accommodations, but we managed." Another contraction seized her, stronger than the last. Sarah breathed through it, using the techniques from her birthing classes. Marcus noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early. First babies usually take their time. He arranged pillows to support her back. "Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength." He paused. "And the men outside?" Marcus's expression hardened for a moment. That was now a secondary concern. "This cabin has been here for 40 years. It's a solid build. The entrance is defensible." His clinical assessment was strangely reassuring. Sarah nodded, then flinched as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcus noted with surprise. Moving faster than expected. He went to the stove and returned with a cup of herbal tea. Red raspberry leaf. It helps with labor. Sarah nodded gratefully. You just had that lying around? It's good for various medicinal purposes. A faint smile touched his lips. Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't my top priority when I scouted this place. The next few hours blurred into a haze of escalating contractions. Before Sarah's eyes, Marcus transformed, the gruff recluse replaced by a focused, competent physician. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate examinations less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he reported. Good progress. By nightfall, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, sweat matting her hair. I don't know if I can do this. You're already doing it. Marcus's voice was firm, an anchor in the storm of pain. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. A noise from outside drew his attention to the window. Twilight had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the undergrowth. Too deliberate for wildlife. They're back, Sarah whispered between contractions. Marcus moved swiftly to the window, peering out cautiously. One person on watch. He retrieved a shotgun, positioning it nearby but out of the window's line of sight. Then he was back at her side, coaching her through another contraction, as if there had been no interruption. Deep breath. That's it. The contractions intensified further, now only a minute apart. A scream tore from Sarah's throat, impossible to contain. I need to push. Marcus examined her again. Not yet. Almost, but not yet. Breathe if you feel the urge to push. The noise outside stopped abruptly. Marcus tensed, listening. They heard you. I can't be quiet, Sarah gasped as another contraction peaked. Don't try to be. He moved to stand between the bed and the door, within reach of both Sarah and the weapon. Let them hear. It might even work in our favor. How? She managed to ask between breaths. Few things are more terrifying than a woman in labor, Marcus said, the slight smile returning. Even hardened men tend to keep their distance. As if in answer, the footsteps outside retreated toward the tree line. Marcus nodded in satisfaction. See? Tactical advantage. Sarah would have laughed if another contraction hadn't consumed her. This one was different. An overwhelming, irresistible urge to bear down. Marcus, she gasped. It's time. He checked one last time. Then he nodded, all traces of humor gone. You're right. 10 centimeters. On the next one, you push. Outside, darkness was complete. The intruders had withdrawn, but Marcus knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, a new life was about to enter the world. 2 forces. One of creation, one of destruction, converged on this tiny cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ready? Marcus asked, positioning himself to guide the baby's arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering her strength as the next contraction began to swell. Push, he instructed calmly. Bring your child into the world. The concentrated intensity of the moment was shattered by the sound of breaking glass. Marcus snapped his head toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the latch. Sarah, keep pushing, he commanded, his voice betraying none of the urgency in his movements as he launched himself toward the intruder. With remarkable upper body strength, Marcus propelled himself from his chair, using the momentum to seize the outstretched arm and twist it savagely. A cry of pain erupted from outside as Marcus slammed the limb against the window frame, forcing the fingers to release a knife that clattered to the floor. Sarah cried out with another contraction, her focus torn between the demands of her body and the struggle at the window. "I'm here," Marcus called to her, maintaining his grip on the intruder while reaching for the shotgun with his free hand. "Keep going, you're doing great." The intruder wrenched his arm free, disappearing from the broken window. Marcus quickly wedged a metal toolbox into the opening, then returned to Sarah's side, shotgun across his lap. "That was impressive," Sarah panted between pushes. "Combat training," he said simply. "Upper body strength compensates." He repositioned himself to continue assisting the birth, his eyes scanning all points of entry. "Focus on pushing now." Muffled voices murmured outside. Several of them. The intruder hadn't come alone. "How many?" Sarah asked, gritting her teeth as another wave of pressure built. "3, maybe 4. Marcus's voice remained steady. "Don't worry about them." "Hard not to," she managed, pushing with the contraction. "They are not getting in." His certainty was a comfort. "Not while I'm here." The baby's head began to crown. "I can see her," Marcus announced, his professional detachment momentarily broken by raw awe. "One more big push,